organization focused on limiting food waste on campus, as well as educating students, faculty, and staff about food waste. So for the food scientists on the call, the leaders of No Food Waste were connected with Phil through John Frelka. And for those of you who don't know, John is a former PhD student at OSU. So we're very excited to have Philip here with us today, and thankful that we were able to make this connection. So Philip's culinary background in Michelin-Star and James Beard Award finalist kitchens was succeeded by working with food entrepreneurs' concept of commercialization at a product development consultancy, where he also led the launch of the Research Chefs Association Evolution of Food Waste Product Development Student Competition, the world's first innovation platform that focused on manufacturing byproducts. His unique food background, involvement with nonprofit impact organizations, curiosity about ingredients historically considered waste, and passion for formulating delicious products at every scale make him a natural fit for ReGrained, a mission-driven brand ingredient platform that connects urban craft breweries to sustainable food systems, where he oversaw production, innovation, sourcing, culinary operations, food science, and every opportunity to do a collaboration dinner pop-up. Now, Philip is excited for an opportunity to work with many types of products alongside companies of all sizes as a product developer for CCD Innovation, a chef-driven consultancy in the San Francisco Bay Area. So thank you for being here, Philip, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So kind of similar to IFTSA within the Research Chef Association, RCA, I led the launch of the RCA Student Committee in 2016. This was in the summer of 2016. And while we were continuing to look for initiatives and what was valuable to students and the upcoming generation of young professionals, it was pretty clear that over time, the theme and the topic of how to take waste into taste and turn trash into cash and create circular food economies, as opposed to linear, with companies of all different sizes, ones that are cultivated off a byproduct, kind of like ReGrained, or companies that would be able to close the nutrient loop within their company. I always kind of point to a company called The Forager, and they have a line of chips that uses juice pulp, and it's an ingredient that they had abundantly available in literal metric tons. And what they decided to do was take the juice pulp and make a really delicious chips. So in creating that student competition, and really the true intent of the student competition, and I know Ohio State is really well aware, is to just get students to go to conference, so students can network and connect directly with professionals and other students, of course, too, about what types of career paths even exist, and the types of career opportunities, and the timeline, and how to roadmap, like almost by working backwards. So Griffith was the founding sponsor of the food waste competition, and in October 2016, we officially launched the Evolution of Food Waste Product Development Student Competition, which is structured a lot more like IFTSA's competitions, more so than the traditional RCA culinology competitions. And through that, I got kind of inherently and indirectly created a network for myself in reaching out to a lot of companies to use their ingredient, or to other companies who were looking to be a sponsor. A lot of these companies started contacting me back and said, "Hey, well, what are you doing with your career, and how can we connect with you in more detail?" And I was pretty flattered at first. I didn't really think that was like the intention, but that's just kind of going to prove that creating content and being involved from a nonprofit or a volunteer leadership perspective is really valuable in just getting to know other professionals and having a way to connect with them and talk about something that you're really passionate about. And for me, that was food waste. In connecting with a lot of these companies, I was also a community organizer for a design thinking ad agency, and their special projects platform is called Open IDEO, and it's the Food Waste Alliance. And so one day on a call, I actually remember the date exactly. It was December 8th, 2016. I was talking about the food waste competition and how we were launching it at the RCA conference in Puerto Rico, March 2017. The CEO and founder of ReGrained direct messaged me and was like, "Hey, Phil, we're hiring. We should talk." And yeah, 1 week later, I told the CEO of ReGrained that I accepted the offer as VP of product, and we were really going to have an impact on creating a brand around food waste and how to upcycle, which then was a newer term, and now is a much more widely used term. And beyond having it be a widely used term, it's something that is like trending at an exponential rate. Whole Foods just came out with their trend reports for 2021 a couple of days ago, and number 6 was upcycling, along with immunity boosting, health and wellness, and plant-based innovation. A lot of things that are already sort of proven market categories. But the market for upcycling still has room for innovation, and it's really ripe for disruptors in the market and companies, small and large, to kind of work towards solving this issue of food waste, paradoxically, with having a growing global population that is increasingly more food insecure. And one of the really good examples that not only is Griffith a partner with the RCA in being a sponsor of the food waste competition, they're also ReGrained's lead investor. So there's a few different kind of ways that we partnered with Griffith to kind of scale our impact and create better together as their mission is driven around. So that was really how I got involved. When I got involved with ReGrained, it was a pretty good fit initially because the two co-founders didn't have a food background. They were better at market. They were a lot better at marketing because I don't have any of that background. My background is as a chef, as Katie pointed out. So to me, using carrot tops to make pestos and chimichurris, using cilantro stems when you're out of chives, and just continuing to use cilantro stems. A lot of these little kind of micro scale upcycled ingredients into things you can put on the menu was sort of how I was introduced to how the chef can have an impact. But it's really up to the food scientist to know how to kind of scale that impact and how to do things that are standardized. So I think all these students really have a really valuable skill in knowing how to scale up and knowing how to do so consistently and without flavor compromise. And that's kind of what we did at ReGrained. My first task was reformulating and the snack bar line, and I added a couple SKUs to it. So initially, that's pretty typical of a startup where the founders aren't from a food company, is kind of getting the supply chain set, making it consistent, and then ultimately getting into a co-packer. And so ReGrained's really one of the leaders, and I would say that this is definitely a trend in upcycled foods, is that companies that manufacture an ingredient but also have a packaged good brand are going to be the ones that are successful in sort of being like thought leaders of this emerging, upcycled market category. What part of the reason behind that is get to control one of the supply chain waste byproducts, you could say, and controlling that supply chain really gives you rights, and if you have the right IP protection, licensing rights to how this ingredient is going to be marketed, how this ingredient is going to scale, and how this ingredient is going to really be pioneered into the mouths of consumers throughout the world, hopefully. And other examples are companies like Renewal Mill, also here in the San Francisco Bay Area. They're upcycling the tofu pulp, from the tofu making process. They call it okara, and they're making it a flour. Barnyana is another really good example. So ugly bananas that are made into bites and crisps and stuff. And then there's also other ingredient suppliers Net Zero and AB InBev. They are both looking at commercializing and standardizing spent grain. AB InBev, through a company called Zia 10, looking to have a spent grain isolate. It's kind of like what whey protein was, 40 years ago. And so that's really kind of with upcycling, that's really one of the trends, and one of the themes of upcycling is whey protein was really one of the first, or really the first ingredient that was like kind of manufactured, upcycled into like a really high value add ingredient. And also, like, what does the dehydration technology look like? Because a lot of these waste byproducts are very water rich, and what's left behind is like fiber. So yeah, so far we've got emerging companies that will be successful in the upcycling space as time progresses are companies that will be able to control the upcycled supply chain by having an ingredient they produce as well as like a packaged brand, because there's already supply, they just have to build demand. Other theme would be that dehydration technology is the key to scaling. This was like a key component to ReGrained, in that ReGrained had a CRADA, it's a Creative Research and Development Agreement with the USDA, where they've co-patented dehydration process as well as the end product for the ReGrained Super Grain Plus flour. And then also companies that are able to market themselves in the B2B space tend to be a little bit more successful, just because the consumer education is there's a lot of awareness and a lot of education, and there's a lot of branding that still needs to be done, like in the upcycling space. To our generation and to people who live in urban areas, the idea of upcycling is really a great idea. But to other people who are in more rural areas, our data has shown that they don't want to pay a premium for upcycling. They don't want to pay the same amount, like even. So there's still a lot of room for innovation, and there's still lots of upcycled foods that are being developed and are not necessarily fully commercialized at scale in the market yet. Want to also highlight the Upcycled Foods Association as well too. That's a great resource if anyone is curious to know more about upcycled trends, upcycled foods that exist, and also ultimately over time, the Upcycled Foods Association is going to have like a labeling sticker, similar to like Fair Trade or USDA Organic or Non-GMO Project Verified. That's going to be a really, really cool theme to kind of watch as the market unfolds. So yeah, well, so it was a ReGrained, and we helped build out a warehouse, and then once we got enough of our spent grain supply chain dehydrated and processed and into a consistent flour, it was really this high protein, high impact ingredient. Then we commercialized this past March, which was when COVID hit, and I was in Minneapolis at the co-packer for like 2.5 weeks. Then commercialized a line of delicious snack puffs. And that's another key theme with upcycled, as with any other food product. You have to make it taste good first. That's kind of the first value. The second value is like, is it nutritious, and how can these brands and these companies talk about the nutrition and the health aspect of it? All the other high impact and upcycled and circular food economy and sustainability initiatives, those are things that kind of keep the consumer, and in my opinion, they keep the brand loyalty. But it isn't like the initial pull like quite yet. So yeah, and then after being at ReGrained for almost 4 years, just short of 4 years, I was really kind of hungry to get back into the kitchen and get my hands on multiple types of products and grow as, you know, as a chef, as a product developer, as a culinologist, as a little bit of a food scientist, like as well too. And luckily there was an opportunity less than 10 minutes from my house, right here at CCD Innovation. It's a product development consultancy that kind of focuses on chef-driven products. And yeah, I have a chance now to work on all different types of products and to, you know, all different types of distribution channels and with companies of all different sizes. And that's really exciting to me. And I'm a little bit involved with ReGrained. I'm just not involved on the daily as an entrepreneur. So I'm also happy to speak about what that's like working in an early stage company, and also what it's like to work as a consultancy. So yeah, that's kind of the high level, you know, story of how I got to be sitting here, like talking to you guys. But I also just was really curious and wanted to just open it up to questions and answers, and happy to continue any conversations after this call as well too.
Okay, thanks, Phil, for that presentation. I think that gave a good idea of what your background is, and we have shared some resources in the chat about ReGrained as well as the Upcycle Food Association, so people can check that out. I'm going to open it up to questions now, so feel free to type it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask Phil a question.
Hi, Phil. This is Chris Simons. I'll make myself seen so you can see the face too. So I have a question for you. So we have a lot of students, I think. So one, I teach the product development class here, which is our capstone class. We have a lot of students, I think, that have really good ideas that potentially can translate into new product efforts. We haven't so much focused on necessarily specific ingredients or upcycling, particular things. But I'm curious, one of the things that I think our students struggle with and maybe don't have a clear insight, and something that I can't give them any guidance on either, is the process of a startup, right? And the hurdles that somebody has to really sort of overcome in order to take an idea into, a viable product. So if you could sort of speak to those and maybe some of the ideas and tips that you have that students could potentially learn from, I think that would be really valuable.
Yeah, and that was, I'm so glad you asked, because that was really the whole, what eventually led to the premise of the evolution of food waste product development student competition, was how can we have a platform that connects students with these larger companies, almost like a matchmaking service, for like a lack of a better term, with these like fresh, super new, innovative ideas with companies who know how to do things at scale. So it's kind of like the business operations, like production side of things, and those are like great resources. And how can you leverage like those resources and then channel it into like getting funding to test your idea? If you have a product, and it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be an ingredient company that takes, years and millions of dollars as we found out, but it's easier if you're not an ingredient company and you're just combining all ingredients that have formal spec sheets and COAs and then developing a product. I'm noticing a lot more like pop-ups with COVID, and I'm noticing people and producers, hospitality industry workers who are selling something to 100 people, and then asking and seeing if how much of those 100 people, what percentage of those 100 people show up or have a repeat purchase. If you have enough velocity there, continue, repeat, recycle the process, you could say. And then over time, we'll approach local retailers and say like, hey, like, we have this product, it's been doing pretty well. If you're able to get a website together or just use Instagram, use that as sort of your starting point in having a pop-up, and then having a few different distribution channels. And then crowdfunding has really changed the game. It has democratized how to get involved into creating a food business. And having a crowdfunding campaign is sort of like the next step, like from there. So we're going pop-up, potentially local retailers or coffee shops or whatever, depending your product is. D2C marketing, or D2C consumer purchasing can be through Instagram or a website if you're able to create it, or partner with a UX designer somewhere on campus. And then from there, if it has enough velocity, a Kickstarter is also like kind of a great way of gathering data as well too. Yeah, and all that should probably be less than $3,000 or $4,000 or so. And if you do it right, and your your formula looks good, and it's cost effective, you may be able to make some money off of it, or breaking even works as well too. So yeah, great question though.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I encourage once you're past the Kickstarter phase, not only to just share the Kickstarter, but also to check out what other companies are doing with other pitch platforms. Food Bites by Rabobank is a really, really popular one. This upcoming cohort there are, I think all of the CPG companies that have been chosen for Food Bites this cohort are either upcycled companies or plant-based companies or a little bit of both. So yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Ashwara, I have a question.
Yeah.
Phil, thanks for talking with us. My question's about like legal hurdles are specific to upcycled foods, and how have you had to interact with any like legal issues that you might not expect for a more traditional food supply?
Yeah, great question, Jeff. So if for startup companies, having your intellectual property protection is really key. And because a lot of these ingredients are new, knowing when to transfer over the trademarks and all the regulatory with some of the companies that you are sourcing ingredients from. Beyond that, to be for example in ReGrained's case, I'll use them as an example. Like there's like a licensing fee essentially. So ReGrained has a trademarked ingredient, ReGrained Super Grain Plus. They trademark they patented the dehydration technology, which is a really key part to how ReGrained has a lot of value, is this innovative technology they've used to process coke, patented alongside the USDA. And then the end product is also trademarked and has patent protections. So that way you are able to kind of control the supply chain more. It's a lot different, being an ingredient company versus a CPG company. But for companies that can do both, there's a lot of value to a lot of very big companies. That's really how ReGrained got connected to Griffith Foods. They got connected to Blue 1877, it's Barilla's incubator. And then there's like some strategic investors like from there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Along those same lines, I had a question. So I think one of the hurdles with upcycled food is that you're using wasted food that you don't know how it's being handled, right? So there might be some complications in terms of policy around food safety. Has ReGrained faced any of that, and how do upcycled companies deal with that?
Yeah, ReGrained's faced a lot of it. Because the spent grain, it's really hot and really wet and really high in water. So those are all like really bad things on the HACCP and the critical control point. So like the biggest critical control point for spent grain, for example, is the transportation of the grain. So companies that are really successful in taking an ingredient and scaling up the ingredient, they're co-located on site wherever they're collecting their supply chain. Yeah.
Any other questions? I just have one more question if no one.
Yeah, you can ask as many questions as you like. Yeah.
Thanks. So with upcycled foods, you're putting in more resources, more energy into producing a food product. And do companies give any thought into what the end fate of that product is? For example, if a ReGrained bar is wasted, that's it's a bigger environmental impact than just wasting the spent grain. So do companies think about that? And if they do, how do they address it?
Yeah, and I think what your bigger question is how to have a shelf life, like as well too, because you could use part of an argument that part of the reason why there is so much wasted food is because a lot of these foods are so fresh, so organic. I don't mean to stage it in this way, but they're using compostable packaging, and that's something ReGrained went through, and it didn't work for our bar line because we didn't have like a glycerin, we didn't have additives, we didn't have mixed tocopherols and all these other than high oleic sunflower oil, like there wasn't a lot of preservative ingredients that would really push the shelf life forward. So that is something to consider. And yeah, like if someone has a ReGrained bar and it goes bad, that was kind of the irony with ReGrained, was that we were actually because we had a compostable packaging, we had a 9-month shelf life, but we were wasting more food than we were actually distributing because the retailers were, the bars were getting hard. The product stability was declining over time, and we had to recall ourselves, which isn't very fun because the farther down the supply chain products get, the more resources go into the more the resources go into it, thus wasting energy and wasting like the gas and petroleum and electricity and a lot of shelf stability space. So yeah, it's definitely something that the upcycled food industry is still looking to kind of iterate and best optimize. So yeah, there's still a lot of room for innovation, and a lot of the there's a few companies in the Food Bites cohort that are like packaging companies, and there's a lot of ag tech and a lot of interesting funding going towards some of these food tech companies that are looking to make better for you packaging that can be applied all across the spectrum. Appeal Sciences is like a really good example of creating like an edible film for like cucumbers and avocados, Santa Barbara based.
Thanks, that makes sense. Any other questions from the audience?
Did you ask the liability transfer question already? I got here late, sorry, this is Brian.
Hey, Brian,
Yeah.
You can feel free to ask the question. What's your question? It was about liability or?
Yeah, so because you're purchasing the items one of our groups here was thinking about doing something similar, but there's concern about liability from using an upcycled stock, basically. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do you deal with that liability transfer, or is there additional liability you face using the spent grain versus an originally sourced grain that was specifically designed for your production requirements?
Yeah, so kind of 2 points on that. One, the Good Samaritan laws like protect companies who are donating products, for example, like or donating food that would be going to waste. There's a lot of loopholes around it, and it is a little different as it applies to manufacturing and stuff. But as we continued, and then as I continued to develop the HACCP plan, the more and more it made sense to kind of input that this ingredient is just another ingredient, not necessarily considered waste, but it does have to have like it can't be like spent grain can't be like scooped out of a compost bin, because the compost bins go like in the parking lot, they're sitting outside, they go all over the place. It has to be like in like a bin, or it has to go into something that like ReGrained approves of and cleans and has like a log, a cleaning log, and a lot of the same types of things that you would have for like a normal food ingredient. So the closer you can make an upcycled food ingredient look like a real ingredient and act and have the same traceability as a real ingredient, that's what the county health professionals started to kind of advise us on.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Comments? If not, thank you so much, Phil, for speaking with us today. And if people have any questions, is there a best way to reach you?
Yeah, I put my email address in the chats. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive there. And yeah, feel free to, hit me up and use me as a resource, and looking forward to staying in touch. So thanks for having me, guys.